This recording, we want to look at how to use a working trial balance, particularly in Excel, to complete this accounting information systems case. By now, you would have, with paper and pencil, recorded your journal entries for the month of August. You've posted to the accounts in the ledger, and ideally, you have already entered in these balances in the unadjusted trial balance. You want to take a moment, you might pause this recording and check to make sure that you've got the same balances. Because, the idea is for you to actually complete this case accurately, and that you'll learn by accurately completing it. It's not a test, it's a case. One thing I want to also point out as we get started with Excel, I already put in the sum, but let me show you, in case you don't know, how to sum. Because obviously we want to add up all the debits, so I just go up here to Auto Sum, click on it. You can see Excel will guess what I want to add up. It guessed wrong. So I'm just going to click on, and I'm going to use my left clicker on cell B4, and then I'm going to drag it all the way down through Income Summary. So I really want to add it up all of that area, and I hit Return. And we can go and see, here's my sum, here's my formula, equals sum B4 through B30. And the shortcut, I could do the same thing. I could click on Auto Sum for the credit side, but a shortcut would be just to copy it over. And let me go through and delete what I just did in a little slower fashion, show you how I copied that over. I click on the cell I want to copy from, then I go to the bottom right corner where I get a plus sign, and I left click on that, hold it down, drag it across, lift up, and there you've got your sum. And I can see, it's not adding up the B column. Notice the formula in Excel changed to the C column. I've got C4 through C30, so it's adding all of that up. Okay, just a little basics there on Excel. Now, the next thing we're going to want to do is, in the case, is solve for adjusting entries. And that's why I'm having you use a working trial balance. A working trial balance is not part of the accounting system. It's a problem-solving tool for the accountant. So we're going to use this working trial balance. We will problem solve for adjusting entries, then we can problem solve for adjusted trial balance, and then use these balances to write out our financial statements. Once we know our statements are correct, we'll come back and problem solve for our closing entries, and then figure out, well, what would be these ending balances after closing or post-closing. Then, of course, once the accountant is finished with this working trial balance, we've got all of this filled out, then the accountant goes back to the journal and will enter in these adjusting entries and post to the ledger. We'll enter in the closing entries, post to the ledger, and then those post-closing balances in the ledger should agree with these post-closing trial balance numbers. So this trial balance, this working trial balance, it's a way for the accountant to work and think about things. Actually, we're going to see these numbers also will be in the accounting system, the journal and the ledger. Well, let's get started. In your case, that first adjusting journal entry, the information in the case tells you about information about accounts receivable. And it tells us of this $25,000 that the company really anticipates $2,500 of that will not be collected. Well, then it would be inappropriate, right, to put that on the balance sheet as $25,000 when we really don't think we're going to get all of it. That would be unfair reporting. If we have somebody reading the financial statements making a decision, like let's say a banker. So if a banker is reading our financial statements, the balance sheet in particular, he or she doesn't want to be misled thinking we have $25,000 we're going to collect when we're really only going to collect $22,500. So we make an adjusting journal entry. If you've read through your chapter, or perhaps you remember from an earlier course, those accounts we don't expect to collect are an expense. So we will debit bad debt expense. So I put the $2,500 in the debit column. We're going to credit. Theoretically, you might think we would credit accounts receivable, but we don't credit it directly. We have the contra asset account, the allowance for doubtful account that we credit. So we do reduce assets through the allowance account. So when we get to the balance sheet, there'll be two accounts for accounts receivable. We'll have the $25,000. we'll subtract the 2,500 for a net realizable value reported of 22,500. Okay, so that's that journal entry, that adjusting entry. I also want to point out that we're going to have lots of numbers, or you're going to have lots of numbers in these adjusting entry columns. So that you can understand what you're doing and the reviewer can understand what they're doing, we need to reference those. So this first adjusting journal entry, I want to reference A. So I'm going to just type A by each of those numbers. So now I have entry A debit to bad expense and a credit to allowance account. And you'll want to do likewise for entry B. You'll label it B, label your adjusting journal entry C, etc., etc. All right, so when you're finished with your adjusting entries, then you need to figure out, how to set up the adjusted trial balance. Well, I'm going to go ahead and do that for you, or we can do it together. Even though you don't have all the adjusting entries. So let's think through. There's really math involved in here. So let's have Excel do all the arithmetic for us. So anytime there's arithmetic to be done and you've got an Excel spreadsheet, program it into Excel for Excel to do the work. Let Excel do the heavy lifting. Let Excel do the math. We'll just program it to do the math for us. So on this adjusted trial balance, we have a debit balance. Well, that debit balance for cash is going to equal, obviously, its beginning balance. We would also add in any debit adjusting entries and subtract out any credit adjusting entries. So look at my formula. I'm starting with the beginning balance of a debit. I add in any debit adjusting entries, and I am subtracting any credit adjusting entries. And then I hit enter, and it gives me the dollar amount. So since there's no adjusting entries, that's $19,000. Now I could enter in that formula for every account where there is a debit. That would be a little time consuming. So we'll do the magic of Excel and copy it all the way down. So I'm going to go ahead and just copy it. And again, and so let's look at how to copy. If I want to copy, I just put my cursor in that bottom right corner. I'm going to left click, hold that click down, and drag it all the way down, and it copied all the way down. So I've got my formula for all of the accounts. The only problem is that some of these accounts have credit balances, not debit. So I need to go in any account, let's start with the allowance account, that really should have a credit balance. So I'm going to delete it. So I just click on it and delete it. The next account that should have a credit balance would be this allowance account. I want to delete it. And then all of these, right, all the payables through retained earnings, all of those will be credit balances, so let's get rid of that. And then, I missed retained earnings, didn't I? So I need to delete that. Then likewise, sales revenue. We want to delete those because those are credit balances. But everything else, cost of goods sold, all the way through the expenses, all of those will be debit balances, so I leave them alone. Okay, so we've got our debit column formulas all in place. And it was really quick, wasn't it? Pretty easy. Well, let's go do the same thing for the credits. I don't want to start with cash. Let's start with the first credit account, the allowance account. Well, that formula, let's start with an equal. We don't have a beginning balance for the allowance account, but because I want to copy this down, I'm going to click on the beginning balance even though it's 0. So I'm going to start with C6. I want to add in credits this time, and then we'll subtract any adjusting debits. So my formula, look at it, if you want to look at it a little closer, it's taking this C6, the beginning credit, I add in any adjusting credits, and I'm subtracting any adjusting debits, and hit enter. Here again, I could copy this all the way down and just go in and delete debit balances this time. I'm going to do it a little different this time just to mix it up a little. I'm going to click on this and right click. So I want to copy that. Now go to your keyboard and push down the control key and leave it down. So I want to copy to accumulate depreciation. All of these accounts, I want to copy that too. So I'm just going to click on all these cells, all these accounts here that are going to have credit balances and the revenue. I'm going to highlight those and then just hit enter. And then boom, it automatically copied them all the way down. So I can see, this formula is taking C13, adding the H13, which is the credits, and subtracting the F13, which was the debits. Okay, so let's go on down here and let's look at the bottom. These bottom amounts, totals, need to have formulas in them as well. And actually, it's going to be the same as what we did over here, correct? Because all I want to do is add up the debits, and I want to add up I want to add up the credits. So I'm just going to copy. So I'm going to click on, it doesn't matter if I click on this one or that one, either way, I want to copy it over. And again, I want to push down my control key. So keep it pushed down on it with your left hand, and then just click where I want to copy it to. Now I'm not clicking on all of these cells. Notice I didn't click on this or that because I don't want it copying there. I want that to be an empty cell. And then I just hit enter, and voila, the totals are there. And we're in good shape, right? Our debits and the adjusting entries balance, our debit and credit and the adjusted trial balance so far balance. Okay, that's all I'm going to do for the working trial balance. You're pretty much at a point where you should be able to finish this. You want to finish your adjusting entries. Now we've already got it set up where those balances are already going to just automatically pop up for you. You're going to come in, you're going to write out your financial statements. After you finish your financial statements, you're going to come in and make your closing entry. And I'm going to let you figure out how to set up the formulas for the post-closing trial balance. But it'll be very similar to what we just did here with the adjusting entries, the adjusted trial balance, excuse me. Okay, the next thing I want to talk about is you're going to write out your financial statements. And so put them, you want to, if you may already have something that says sheet 1 and sheet 2 here. If so, just click on that. Actually, I guess you don't because you're using mine. So you don't have that. I want to create another sheet. And I may want to rename this. Perhaps I want to put my income statement here. So if I do that, I create sheet 4, right click on that, choose rename, and then I just type in income statement. Now you can put all of your financial statements on this sheet, or maybe you want to create another sheet for the statement of retained earnings. So if you do, create another sheet, rename it, retained earnings, and then we're going to create a last sheet. Again, right click, rename for the balance sheet. Oops, misspelled that. Okay, so then I have 3 sheets, one for each of the financial statements, or it's up to you. You can decide, you can put them all on one sheet. Okay, I want us to look at, if you will, page 115 and 116 of your textbook. And because I want to point out, this is your template. This is your template to put into Excel. So you're just going to want to do what you see here. Much of this narrative, now of course some of the account names for expenses will be different, but otherwise much of this narrative, this wording if you will be the same. You won't have for year ended, I think it's for month ended, August 30th, I forget what the year is, 2014. What I want to point out though while we're on this page is that anytime there is arithmetic involved in a financial statement, when you put that in Excel, you should have a formula entered there. So if we were using these numbers, we wouldn't type in 84,000. You would enter in a formula. Likewise, for totaling these expenses, we would have a formula for that. So you want to think through every time there's a arithmetic involved, use a formula. Okay? And that'll be for all of your financial statements. Likewise, I want to talk about referencing in Excel. Notice, and you probably know this already, but one financial statement all the financial statements connect together. So one financial statement runs into the next one or leads into the next one. For instance, the income statement. Net income flows into retained earnings because we move this year's earnings into earnings that are retained in the business. So one number flows into the next financial statement. This 12,200, you should not type that in. There again, that should be entered in as a formula. You're just going to say this cell equals that cell. So I would just type in equals, and then I would go up to the income statement or back to the income statement and click on that, hit enter, and you're done. Again, when your cursor is on this cell, you want to hit equals, go to this cell, click on it, hit enter, and you'll see 12,200 will just automatically pop up. Likewise, your ending retained earnings goes forward to the balance sheet, right? We're going to see that. I'll turn the page. Right, there we go. Here it comes. There's our retained earnings. So on the balance sheet, that particular number is going to be a formula as well. That cell address is going to be equal, and I go back to my retained earnings, click on that cell, hit enter, and you'll see this 26,400 will pop up. Actually, for your spreadsheet, it'll be a different number, but you should get my point. The other thing I want to talk about is the classified balance sheet. And much of the chapter, when it illustrates a balance sheet, it's just a plain Jane balance sheet. But I have asked you to write out a classified balance sheet because that's the dominant and most common type of presentation for a balance sheet. So the current assets, all those that, are going to be due, used, sold, or converted to cash within a year. So anything that's less than a year is current. And then we have our long-term, in this case, long-term physical assets. Likewise, our liabilities are classified as short-term. Anything due within a year is current. Anything due after a year is long-term. So notice in the case, I tried to clue you in some of the wording in the case. For instance, like notes receivable, it'll tell you whether it's due within a year or after a year. So that tells you whether it's short-term or current or long-term. Likewise with the note payable, is it due within a year? It's current. But if it's due after a year, you would list it as long-term. Okay, so then you're going to put these financial statements in your Excel spreadsheet. Here's what the grading rubric. So when your spreadsheets are graded, here's what your instructor is going to be using. So here's a rubric that's been put together. So content, is everything there that ought to be there and perfectly done? Or is it almost perfect? You got most, but you've got some of it, but not all of it. This is very, very incomplete, and here you really haven't done anything. So you'll be awarded points. Let's say everything looked perfect. You'll get a score of 4. Graphs, that's not applicable for this particular case, so you won't get a score there. Math, have you entered in all the formulas and are they accurately done? Do you have most of the formulas accurately done? Or have you got, most of the formulas, but, again, a lot of them or some of them have mistakes. And here you've got, practically no formulas or lots of math mistakes, and here's nothing. So again, if you continue to go through and you're doing it very well, visually pleasing, that your financial statement's well organized. The working trial balance is already set up for you, so really you don't have anything to organize there. But your financial statement should be well organized. There should be no spelling errors. They should be set up to look just like what I see in the textbook. Same thing with, words that are indented, words not indented, that sort of thing. So let's say again, it's very visually appealing. There's no misspelled words. You've got commas in your number. So instead of 38,000, it's not 38000. It's 38,000. So I can easily, or the reader can easily read it. And technology, that you are able to use Excel. So looks like you've got a score of 16. Possible, I originally had as 20, but really in your case it's going to be 16. For this particular assignment, it's really only going to be worth 10 points, but you got 100%, so you're going to get assigned a grade 10 out of 10. Okay, so that goes over that. If there's additional questions, we can discuss that in the discussion thread.